Welcome to the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast, Dr. Kyba.
Thank you.
Say hi to Greg Eric, my co-host.
Hi, Greg. It's nice to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you.
I'm going to jump right into it and ask you a question that sort of puts us into the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast feel. Why should two light bulb salesmen, say one from Toronto and one from Minneapolis, care about whether or not the sky is dark at night?
Well, I think it comes down to marketing, for you guys at least. There's other reasons to care, but for you guys, it could come down to marketing. So if you're putting light into the sky, that's light the customer has to pay for. And if you work out a way to light the area without putting light into the sky, then they don't have to pay for that light. So you can reduce the amount that they have to pay with careful lighting. And the other thing is you can market it for the environmental impact, right? So if you're putting less light where it's not needed, then you're reducing the environmental impact. And for the cities, you're giving them back this idea that they're able to see the stars. So that's, from your perspective, what I would say one of the benefits is.
What is the bad side about light at night? Like, why should the general population then be concerned about light at night?
So I've been talking a lot about this recently, and I think one of the things that we should start with, and I had mentioned this already, is it costs a lot, right? We spend on outdoor lighting somewhere in the range of, say, 50 to 200 billion euros or dollars a year, something in that range, right? Don't know exactly, but it's around that. That's a lot of money, and we pay either as taxpayers for public lighting, or we're paying as consumers for example, advertising lighting or lighting at airports and shipports, things like that, right? So that's an enormous amount of money that if we could save it, we could be spending on other stuff. The other aspect is why we need to be concerned about lighting is that there's this idea out there that, well, we need more light in order to be able to see better. But I think any lighting professional knows it's not in general about the amount of light so much as it is about the quality of the light, like how is it distributed. And so with really good lighting techniques, you're going to be able to get much better vision with a much lower amount of light.
Okay, just quickly, now that you're on the podcast, your mic is you're talking a little loud. Can you pull the mic a little bit back from you, Dr. Kyba? Yeah, a little bit more. Okay. So
how's that?
So there's a business case there, is what you're saying.
Yeah, effectively. I mean, okay, so you had asked me, I got lost in the train of thought, but you'd asked me, why should anybody care about lighting? So there's certainly a business case there. Another example, when we have a street light that's shining up into someone's bedroom window, that just makes them mad, right? So that light is going in there, it's not helping anybody, it's just making somebody mad, and we're paying for that light to shine it in their bedroom window. And a similar thing happens when you have a street that's backing onto or adjacent to a forest. Then if you're putting a lot of light into the forest, you're disturbing the animals that live there. Similarly with bridge lighting or air lighting near a waterfront, if you're putting the light into the water, that's going to really disturb a lot of the animals that live there, and it's not actually providing human beings any benefits. So it's just sort of like, well, if we could avoid doing that, it's a win for everybody.
And in what ways is it disturbing the animals and plants?
So there's a couple of different ways it can happen. The one is simply to do with sort of orientation, what you're able to do. So if you are an animal that's usually active in the daytime or at twilight, having the additional light can allow you to be active at times that normally you weren't able to. So that might allow you to, for example, extend your hunting hours, which could potentially be good for that animal, might be bad for the prey though, for example. Another aspect that's similar to that is mice, for example, might be afraid of being preyed on by owls, and so they might be less likely to go out into a more brightly lit area, and that reduces the amount of time they have for foraging. So you see all these kinds of impacts to different animals and behavior. The other thing that happens is that you can actually change the physiology, right? So they see this with birds a lot, for example. Because many birds anyway, don't live inside of a closed nest, then if there's light shining on them, it affects what time they wake up. And you can change the timing of certain events. So we see it in reproduction as well. For example, there's a very cool study in wallabies in Australia that showed that their reproduction is really dramatically changed And with animal reproduction, when it's on a seasonal cycle, there's a good reason usually for that, that the timing of the babies matches when the food is going to become available. So if the animal's babies are coming early or coming later, then it can be a worse match with when the food is going to be available for them to be growing.
Okay. And then in what ways does it impact human beings?
Well, I think that so we're talking about outdoor lighting mainly here, right? So the main impact of lighting for humans, it allows us to get around, right? But when people talk about the impacts of light on humans, I think they're generally more talking about indoor lighting. And we can't separate this from the fact that we're not getting enough natural light in the daytime, right? So if we spent most of our day outside and then came home and had a brightly lit living room, it wouldn't be such a big deal. But the problem is that, I'm sitting in an office here. When I go home, it's not going to be actually very much darker than it is here now. And so I'm not getting that signal of this is daytime, this is nighttime, that if I was able to spend more of my time outdoors during the daytime, there would be a clear signal. Or if, for example, I had a different style of lighting at home, so maybe if I had a very low blue content light at home, very sort of orange, warm color temperature light, warm light, with low color temperature, that would have less of an impact on me. That would help my brain to know that now is nighttime. But I mean, that's indoor lighting, right? So there are a lot of people who are concerned about whether street lighting could be affecting people's sleep, but there's not a lot of study into that yet. Certainly, a lot of people complain about it, but it hasn't really been systematically studied yet, as far as I know.
So how did you get into researching dark sky? Like, how did that start, Dr. Kyba?
Well, I moved with my family to Germany in 2009 and 2008, actually. And for the first year, I was doing paternity leave with my daughter, and my wife was working. And then I was looking for a job in the area in Berlin. And initially, I was actually looking more for industry jobs, but I ended up sort of stumbling into this research job, and it turned out to be really great because it's an area that I'm just really, really excited about and really interested in. And so that was really very lucky. And then since then, I've sort of extended over and over through additional contracts and made this project run much longer than was originally envisioned.
Give that mic another little pull. Wait, it seems to be curving back in there. Yeah, a little bit more. Give it more.
Okay,
yeah,
how's that?
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, just every now and then there's a little like that. So,
okay.
You got into it. Is there any like catastrophic environmental problems being caused by artificial light at night?
So it's very hard to know that, right? Because it's very difficult to separate one particular stressor from other ones, right? So in some cases where you have a chemical that simply kills everything that touches, right? Then it's really easy to say, okay, that thing is bad, right? But when we have these stressors that are mixed together, right? So a city is more noisy than in the countryside or in nature, and there's higher levels of particulate matter, and there's more light, and there's all of these different things, right? They interact together, and it makes it very challenging to try and say, okay, the impact on this species is due to this, or it's exactly this much. And when we talk about the sky brightness, right, so the light that spreads away from cities and gets really quite far away from cities, there it's incredibly challenging to try and understand what impact that has, because you can't, for example, say, okay, we're just going to turn all the lights off every couple nights and see what that does to the owls, right? I mean, that's not realistic, right? So you have to try and do lab experiments or field experiments where you manipulate the light. But in particular for the sky glow levels, that's very difficult. And there's always a difference between what you do in the laboratory and what you do in the field. And even more so with these points about changing behavior, right? You might change behavior. You could maybe even change the number of eggs that an animal lays. But if those eggs are somehow more successful, it might not actually influence the species as a whole, right? So it's very, very challenging to show exactly what the impacts of these things are. You can really understand in a lot of ways how it can matter, but doing the actual measurements is quite challenging. So it's becoming much more advanced in recent years. We have now really, really big field sites, and I'm involved actually in an experiment trying to understand what this sky glow coming down from the sky does to animals living in lakes.
Okay. I've got a series of questions, might backtrack a little bit here. So I wanted to start off with light pollution. Is that considered outdoor only?
I think it depends who you talk to, and I think that we should, in general, I try to avoid saying light pollution other than just generally, I work on light pollution, right? But I think it's much better
Right.
to be clear what we're talking about. So if we're talking about glare, we should talk about glare. If we're talking about light trespass, we should talk about light trespass. Sky glow is sky glow, right? So now I forgot your question exactly. It was
Is it
which aspect
outdoor
of light
only?
pollution?
But you've
Oh,
kind
okay,
of
okay,
you've
yeah.
answered it.
So so I specialize in outdoor light, right? And so that's my main
Yep.
area that I should talk about. But I do go to a lot of meetings, and I have a lot of colleagues who work on indoor light as well. And I think that this is an issue that we need to think about. And chronobiology in general. So going beyond just light, but going to this idea that when your doctor measures your blood pressure matters, right? If you're trying to track your health over time and you're moving around what time the doctors are measuring blood pressure, that's going to be a problem. Similarly, when we take certain drugs, right? Doctors usually tell people to take drugs in the morning because it's easier to remember, but it could be that some of those are conflicting with our body's rhythms, right? So it's definitely true, I think, that we need to worry about our light exposure, and more generally, we need to recognize that we are animals that have these diurnal rhythms, and for good health, we need to support those rhythms.
So the naked ape has a diurnal rhythm that needs to be respected from a lighting design perspective. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, basically. And it comes to more than lighting design because it's a kind of a whole societal thing, right? If we're setting alarm clocks and waking ourselves up at the wrong time, we can help that maybe to some extent with light, but maybe the problem isn't just that there's not enough light in the school. The problem is the school is starting too early, right? So you can try and intervene a little bit with having a nice bright light in the classroom, but really maybe you should be asking the question, why is it that we're making kids get to school at 7:30 in the morning?
So when was light pollution first measured? And where I'm coming
So
from
you're
with
talking
that?
about the sky brightness, you mean?
Yeah, because I saw this
Or
study
yeah.
that you put out from 2012 to 2016 that the growth rate was 2.2% per year in terms of brightness. So when was that first started measuring?
So in that particular study, we were looking at the light that was going upwards into space, right? Which is
Okay.
different in some sense from the light that's coming back down. So the satellite observations of light at night really started sort of, I think, in the late 60s was when this defense satellite started, but they aren't digitally available. So we don't really have a record until starting at about 1992. That's when the digital satellite records become available. Now, the first data was from a defense satellite. It was basically designed to tell whether or not there was going to be clouds over areas that they might want to fly like a spy plane over and take photographs, right? So they were looking at reflected moonlight from clouds. And because of that, it wasn't really designed as a scientific instrument. So the first scientific satellite that we have started in 2012, which is why that study starts basically in 2012. And going back to the question asking also about sky brightness, when did that start to get measured? That started to get a little more serious in about the 70s from astronomers, but for a long time it was kind of like a side thing, right? So retired astronomers did it, or astronomers did it as like part of their, something that they're interested in on the side, but that wasn't their main topic of study. And so what we really saw is starting around 2006 with the publication of this book, Ecological Consequences of Artificial Night Lighting, people started to get really more serious about it. And if you look back around sort of 2009, 2011, that's when it started to get really, really active. A lot of people working in this field.
And so is 2.2%. We have no idea what it was before that then, before 2012, the growth rate.
Yeah, so there's an estimate for the late half of the 20th century that was about 3 to 6% per year.
Sure.
And the difficulty is because we didn't have global data sets, it's just really difficult to really know what it was, right? And obviously in certain places it grew much more rapidly than in others, right? So if you go out to small towns in the American West, right, and especially between those towns, right, there's not a lot of light there even now, right? So when you talk about New York City, well, that was a different rate from what they had in a small town in the Midwest or the West.
So you still consider it an issue, even if it was 3 to 6% previously. Now it's only 2.2. That sounds like a decrease. But
yeah,
that's
well,
a decrease on the increase rate. That's a decrease on the increase rate. Right.
Well, that's what we're hoping for, right? That's what we'd like to see.
Yep.
The problem is that with LEDs, the satellite that we have up there is not sensitive to any light below 500 nanometers, right? So it's completely blind to blue light.
Ooh.
And when we had mainly sodium lamps, that didn't really matter, right?
Oh, man.
Because pretty much there's not very much blue light in sodium.
Wow.
And the other thing is that the satellite has a little bit of sensitivity to infrared light, right? And sodium lamps have also, high pressure sodium anyway, often has an infrared line that the satellite can see. So when
Dr.
you
Kyba, that's a really big problem, because I would say that
absolutely.
I would say that the vast majority, over 95% of outdoor LED lighting is either 4,000 or 5,000 K, and probably mostly 5,000 K. Wouldn't you say, Greg?
yeah, I agree.
I mean, like it's probably 90% 5,000 K, 9% 4,000 K, and 1% everything else.
Yep.
So yeah, this was the thing, is what we had expected to see is that we would see decreases in the amount of light because of the cities that switched to LED. And when we look at specific places that held luminance constant, we do see that to the satellite, they look like they got darker, right? So that means that this 2.2%, that's like a lower limit, right? Because we know that we're missing a lot of the light that comes from white LEDs.
Wow, that's
incredible. And, you know, we can get around it to some extent using astronaut photographs, but they don't cover the whole world the way the satellite does. So, of course, this is a big issue.
Hey, Scott, can we illustrate this with a slide, Dr. Kyba? One of those slides you sent me?
Yeah, absolutely. Slide 1 would be great. Slide 1 or slide 3 is exactly right for this
Hey,
topic.
Scotty, throw up slide 3 for me. Is that the one?
Okay. Yeah. So what we see here is 3 frames, right? The 2 on the left, A and B, those are photographs taken by astronauts on the International Space Station. So what you see is that the city of Milan changed from sodium lamps that are orange to white LED, but the surrounding areas are still sodium lamps, right? So that's what we see when we have a color photograph from the astronaut. Now, when we look at the data with this worldwide viewing satellite, because it's not able to see a portion of the light, it mistakes this change for a decrease. And that's why we see that it looks like the city of Milan really decreased in the satellite and the surrounding areas stayed relatively constant, right?
There's no way
we know about this, and that's...
Yeah, there's no way that Toronto decreased over the last 5 years. There's absolutely no way. I mean, it's the amount of wall pack lighting and parking lot lighting that's been changed to LED and is about 5 times brighter is vast. It's enormous. Just in private sector alone. You know, Toronto itself hasn't changed its street lights to LED yet. They're still high pressure sodium. But when you fly in on a plane, you can see these bands of white and bands of orange and bands of white. And if the satellite's not measuring those bands of white, it is missing vast increases in light.
So the satellite is measuring in its own band that is not photopic or scotopic, right? And so it's true we're missing light, but it's maybe, you know, it's a portion of the total light. So we see the light in orange, we see it in red, we see it in green. It's just the blue part that we're missing out on. So it's an important part, but it's not as if the satellite doesn't see the lamps at all, right? It's just undercounting them to some extent.
You know what's interesting? Do you have, like, would you lobby any regulatory bodies or accreditation bodies in North America or Europe? Do you guys go to them and talk to them about stuff?
I talk to them, so I'm not a lobbyist, right? I get called a lot and asked questions, so I give feedback. I was for several years on the board of directors of the International Dark Sky Association. So I give a lot of feedback and I get requested for advice fairly often, but it's not as if I'm making appointments and knocking on doors and arguing for a specific solution. So I certainly obviously have my opinion as a private person, but in terms of what I do from day to day as research, it's more measurement and not not going
Well,
around telling people
if
what to put in.
yeah, if there was one regulatory body or one accrediting body in North America, you'd want to change policy, or you'd want to really listen to your message. Which one would it be?
So it's a difficult question, right? The problem is that there's more to lighting, to outdoor lighting, than street lighting, right? So, for example, the U.S. Department of Energy is very interested in street lighting, and we've been talking a lot back and forth because they want to issue a few clarifications about the study, make sure everyone understands what we measured and what we didn't measure, because some of the news reporting is not exactly clear on some of the issues, right? And so that's great that the DOE is very involved in trying to get good street lighting going in places, right? But you mentioned, for example, these wall packs going up, right? Who do you talk to in order to deal with this problem, right? So you can have a local lighting ordinance, and when you're in a small town, like near a dark sky park or something, then through like neighborly discussions, a lot of times you can come to good solutions. But when you're talking about a big city like Toronto, how are you supposed to exactly regulate?
I have an
this
idea
issue?
for you. I'll tell you. So
Yeah.
there's a accrediting body in North America called the Design Lights Consortium, and their role is to tell utilities which fixtures should be rebated and which ones shouldn't. And right now, there's no guidance from the utilities or the DLC with respect to dark sky compliance. And Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if it's still the case, but in the past, dark sky compliant accessories would render a wall pack not DLC approved. Is that correct, Greg?
I believe so, yeah. I don't think you can have an accessory be DLC approved to make a fixture that wasn't. I think the entire unit has to be DLC approved.
Right. So there was an issue and the lowest priced light fixtures are always not dark sky compliant. And so they have accessories that go with them. But if you put that accessory on the fixture, which is, say it's $20 ad or nothing, it's 20, but the fixture's $300 and the accessory's $15 or $30, it's nothing. But that would then render that unit ineligible for a rebate.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah,
I mean,
no, it's an issue. So, I mean, we're having discussions in Europe right now because they're developing a green public procurement document specifically for street lighting, right? And it's very focused on energy efficiency at the moment, at least in the past it was. And now they're trying to bring in these dark sky issues. But you have these conflicting problems, right? On the one hand, you want to try and get a lot of lumens per watt in order to avoid using a lot of energy. And that is a worthwhile environmental concern, right? And on the other hand, for a bunch of reasons, you would like to limit the blue component of the light. That, depending on how strongly you work on limiting that can reduce the efficiency in terms of lumens per watt, right? So there's conflicting goals here, right? And, if you really want to go to a very dark sky friendly lighting, so say, for example, you're close to an observatory, places like La Palma, they use either true amber or PC amber LED. True amber especially is going to have quite a bit lower luminous efficacy than white LED, right? But they're doing this for a specific environmental reason, right? And so I think this is part of the issue, is that there are conflicting goals in terms of environmental protection with regards to lighting, right?
So the environmental.
And then you have the other issue.
I was going to say the environmental benefits of energy efficiency are fighting the environmental benefits of dark sky in the lighting world.
To some extent, right? I mean, on the other hand, if you look at the LEDs that went in 6 or 7 years ago, their luminous efficacy was a lot lower than what we can get now, right? So were those things environmentally friendly at all, right? And on the other hand, we can see that, for example, 3000 Kelvin is really catching up to 4000 Kelvin in terms of luminous efficacy. There's not such a difference there anymore. But another point is, say that you have a lamp that's dark sky compliant, right? You have a nice fixture, it doesn't shine any light upwards, and then you go in and the person who goes in and installs it puts it in at an angle, right? Now it's shining some big fraction of the light upwards. It's putting out a huge amount of light in a glare angle, right? And so you have the problem that the product itself could be really well designed to minimize glare and to minimize light pollution. But if it gets installed incorrectly, now it's shining a lot of light into the sky again, right? So this is a very challenging issue that involves more than just street lighting, and it comes to the private lighting, and then it becomes a lot more challenging to figure out how do you deal with this, right? So if you have somebody who's going to hire a lighting designer to do the design for their property, hopefully they're going to end up getting something that's pretty good, right? But if you have somebody who's lighting a parking lot on their own, right, and you see this a lot in places in the United States and Canada, right, somebody just puts up a floodlight to try and light their parking lot. Those things often are shining a massive amount of light either into the sky or glaring down the street, or shining into a tree or something like that, right? So I have some pictures where the parking lot itself, the light is shining into a tree, and half the parking lot's in darkness, right? And you're just like, this is not accomplishing.
Well,
what
I'll tell you
your
this:
goal
the
was,
problem
which
with that is, I would also say, and Greg, you asked me, you correct me if I'm wrong here, but most people that would do an LED lighting upgrade would probably source the light fixtures from Premier Lighting. Greg, they'd call you up and they'd say, I need, what's your price on 10 80-watt LED wall packs? Someone on the order desk would give him a price. He'd call his electrician and say, hey, change these out and get me a rebate. And there's absolutely no consideration from anybody that knows anything about dark sky or anything else. Greg, what do you think of that?
The only exception is if the city requires dark sky. Some cities are dark sky or require the fixture to be dark sky compliant,
So
but that's on a city level.
Yeah.
So now you're talking each individual city could do their own thing. One of the questions I had is, how is the International Dark Sky Association funded, or how is the research you're doing funded? Who funds it?
So my research has been funded variously by national grants in Germany and some of the travel funding and things like that has come through European grants in the past. Right now, I'm funded basically internally from the institute that I work at. And in about 2 years, I'm going to switch over to a European project. The International Dark Sky Association is quite largely member funded. In the past, they have done some consulting work that they made some money from, but it's mainly through member donations. They do have a little bit of income from the Fixture Seal of Approval program as well, where they certify light fixtures as dark sky friendly. But yeah, so that's where the money's coming from.
So
there.
no major lighting
amount,
manufacturers, though. No major lighting manufacturers are funding you guys?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not on the board right now, right? And I have a feeling that probably they wouldn't say exactly who gave how much, right?
Sure.
So, I mean, I do know there are some lighting designers in the past who have been donating, but yeah, I'm not on the board now, and I think probably they're not so interested in saying exactly who gives all the funding.
Would there be any funding availability to incentivize lighting distributors or manufacturers to promote it more or sell more of a dark sky compliant fixture?
I mean, I think to some extent what the International Dark Sky Association wants to do is to help generate a market for more friendly lighting. So, for example, with the International Dark Sky Parks and Reserves, those places are going to be creating demand for 3000 K or even lower color temperature lightings, and for solutions like PC Amber and True Amber LED. So the idea is you get a lot of places that want to buy these products, and that helps build a market for them. And then hopefully people go visit the Dark Sky Park and they walk around in this small town and they say, man, this lighting is nicer than what we have on my street, right? Why is it that this village has this really nice light, and on my town I have this glaring lamp that's shining in my bedroom window, right? And then they go home.
Dr.
And talk
Kyba,
to
I would make this point to that. I think that's going to be ineffective, and I'll tell you why. Because when you have good lighting, you don't notice it.
Mm-hmm.
right? So people
Yeah.
aren't going to be walking around Cologne saying, I love being here because of the amber PC LED lights that are on the
Yeah, yeah.
walls and in the street lights. They're just going to say, wow,
No,
it's
the
so
idea is
romantic and nice here and it's bright, but it's also not
exactly.
offensive. They're not going to be taking note
Yeah.
of that. So I think there
No,
needs
no,
to
the
be
bigger deal is ideally when they go home. I mean, part of it is also when you're in a place like that, it's advertised, right? So they're trying to make the visitors know about that they have these lights that were done for that. To get back though to I think one of the solutions that might work best, which is probably not popular with a lot of people, but you know what we see from the history of lighting is that as light gets cheaper, people tend to use more of it. Right? So if you would really like to restrict light use, the sensible thing to do is to make light more expensive. And one of the simplest ways you could do that would be through having, for example, like a carbon tax or an electricity tax raises the price of light. Maybe you send rebates to everybody or who knows what, right? You don't want to necessarily make this problematic, but that would hopefully then get people being more creative about finding solutions to have an area well lit, but with a lower draw on energy, right? So if you have to pay more in order to shine the light, you're going to want to avoid, you know, spraying it all over the wall. You want to put it on the area where the task is taking place, right? So this is an idea that I think probably would end up being one of the most effective ways. It's nothing to do at all in some sense with dark sky protection, but the fact that light was more expensive would just make you be more careful and conservative with how you light.
Well, here's what I think. I think the easiest thing to do would be to maybe like have dark sky compliance in the DLC's qualified products list. Greg, wouldn't that be the easiest thing to do?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think because a lot of the projects we do are based on rebates, and that's based from what DLC provides.
Yeah, I mean that would be a massive, fast, quick way to basically. So there's a rebate program in Ontario that goes to 2020, okay, and a huge amount of that is outdoor lighting, wall packs, poles, whatever. And if the DLC just said no, DLC 4.3, all fixtures must be dark sky compliant. I don't know what they'd have to do that, Greg, but that would immediately revert the changing from 5,000 Kelvin light polluting fixtures to dark sky compliant lower Kelvin temperature fixtures almost overnight. Like you'd have a massive shift in the industry. It would be immediately. People would be showing that at trade shows, Light Fair, DLC 4.5's coming out on June 1st. Greg, it would be crazy, wouldn't it?
It would, yeah. I mean, there's a lot that would have to go into it to make sure it still provides light and all that, and they'd have to have a reason to do it.
The reason would be that their mandate is to recommend to utilities which light fixtures should be, like, forget about the energy efficiency side. I think, and I'm not going to tell the DLC what their mandate is, but I think it's this. I think they exist in order to help utilities make the right lighting decisions so that they can then incent good behavior from their rate base. So if you're saying we want you to get rid of those 250 watt HPS lights and we want you to put in an LED that's, whatever wattage, 60 watts or 80 watts or 40 watts. We also want you to make sure it's dark sky compliant. And that's just an easy add-on to that. And then it's everybody else's problem, Greg.
You're right.
Like,
sure.
Sure, you're going to have some fixtures that some guy points up in the air and stuff like that, but the vast majority of them will just be dark sky compliant. They'll be installed on a vertical wall with a shield on the top, and they'll be 3,500 Kelvin or 3,000 Kelvin. And remind me here, Dr. Kyba, what's the advantage, other than the satellite seeing this light, what's the advantage to lower Kelvin temperatures for health, for humans or animals? What's the advantage of that?
Well, I'll start with the sky brightness, right, issue. So if you look at the sky in daytime, it's blue, right? So the blue light just scatters a lot more in the atmosphere. It has a lot better chance of coming back down to the ground as sky glow. So reducing the blue light there is advantageous. The other thing is that for most mammals, at least, this effect on the circadian biology is much stronger with blue light, right? In fact, the long wavelength light doesn't affect it at all, or almost at all. it's still a question, though, whether or not outdoor street lighting is having much of an effect on our biology as humans, right? So I think that that's actually one of the lower issues. For me, I would say, this color temperature issue is important. We should talk about it. In terms of like comfort and enjoying a city, I personally feel that if it's a warmer color temperature, it's nicer. Another thing that can happen is that the pupil response is to some extent stronger with blue light, right? So that's why astronomers go around everywhere with red flashlights, right? Because your pupils stay wide open under the red light, and you're able to see more. So there's other reasons to consider that. But in terms of reducing light pollution, reducing the effect on the sky and on the environment, the much bigger issue are that you use a full cutoff fixture and that you install it correctly, right? But the second issue is that you don't overlight, right? So if you have people going in and putting in 5 times more luminaires than is necessary, it doesn't matter how efficient and how dark sky compliant those luminaires are. You have too many of them, you're putting too much light there, right? And that's also a social problem for the cities, right? Because you have these situations where you, in fact, one that I just talked to the Department of Energy about recently, they're saying that in Florida, particularly, they have a lot of gas stations that are extremely brightly lit under the canopy. And there's a fight going on in one town right now with a Costco that's in violation of the city's lighting ordinance. And Costco's lobbying to get the lighting ordinance changed because they want to have, I think it was 120 lux on the under the canopy, right? And so there's this problem apparently in Florida that when people leave gas stations, that's a time when they're really likely to get into a car accident at nighttime, right? So you have older drivers who have a longer adaptation time when they go from a really bright area to a dim area, and they leave under this really bright canopy and go onto a more regularly lit street, right? So there becomes a public safety issue that you should be saying, look, there should be limits on luminance and there should be limits on illuminance in order to promote public safety, to make sure that the public street lighting system is working, right? And if you put up a video sign that is not adjusting between daytime and nighttime, right, and you're running it at daytime levels at nighttime, that's going to make it very difficult for drivers to see, right?
I totally,
and this would be the basis for having a regulation for saying, look, there's going to be limits on what you're allowed for luminance at nighttime.
When I drive home from work, there's this guy, he's got a big LED sign on the side of his building, and he advertises political messages or sales at his thing or whatever. And I'll tell you, if you wanted to torture somebody really bad, you just stand them in front of that sign for 6 hours and they'll probably be dead. I mean, it's so bright and brutal. It's horrible. You're driving down the road and this light is just smashing into your face. Yeah. And, there's another guy, he has not everything needs to be lit up like a prison yard, There's another guy on my drive home that has an auto wrecking yard, and he's taken one of these 120 watt LED fixtures. He's put it on a pole, but he's pointed it up like maybe 70 degrees, and he's shining it across his lot, but it's shining into the road. And as you drive into that, you lose all of your focus on the road, and you can't see down the road anymore until you get past it. And I look at that and I say, that's crazy. Hey, Greg, how do you feel about that as a guy that's put up so many non-compliant wall packs? Like in the beginning, when this started, if you did a building with LED and you did all these wall packs around the building, that building stood out and looked good, right? But now when you go down a street and every building has these 5,000 Kelvin wall packs and they're shining out into the street, and it's really, I think it reduces your ability to see, Greg.
Yeah, I would agree. I think when you go into a site, that's the first thing you notice, and it attracts your attention. The bright light shining in your eyes, and then you're trying to get your bearings back, and you have to look down a lot of times. Yeah, I agree. I think it's something where, as a whole, we got to just look at it and lighting space better, and not just putting up glare bombs, because that's basically what's been done for the last 3 years.
Yeah, glare bombs. That's exactly what it is. And you know what the other thing too is, what's interesting to add to this? We interviewed, do you know Dr. Arnold Wilkins? Dr. Kyba?
Don't think so.
So he's a professor in England, and he studies temporal modulation of light sources, so flicker. And it's interesting. There's something what was it called? Intersaccadic percep. So when you're moving quickly, you can actually see the bands of light, right? And I think some of these outdoor street light projects originally are creating these pockets of high brightness and no brightness as you drive through it, and it actually reduces your ability to see, even though your body is your mind is thinking it's brighter because it's whiter, but it's actually causing glare. Is that something that you're familiar with, Dr. Kyba?
This is now quite a bit outside of my professional experience, right? But yeah, I've experienced things like that. One of the other things that I wonder about too is when we have a lit freeway with particularly with white light, and it's relatively well directed, right? You have this feeling that you can see really well, but if there's a possibility for deer or other animals to come running onto it, right? You have this feeling that you see really well, but you're not getting any vision in the ditch basically at all, right? And so I wonder whether that can contribute to the feeling that you can drive faster. And I think there haven't been a lot of studies on terms of like how people drive under different light conditions, how the light might influence like their level of aggressiveness, or how much they take it back a little because they feel more concerned about.
It's the party at night. It's the party at night paradigm where, you know, when you're standing on a dark street and someone's having a party in their house and all the lights are on, you can see everybody in the house clearly as if you're watching a TV. But if they look out the window from the brightly lit space, they can't see anything out there. They don't even know you're standing there, right? So when you're driving through this super bright pocket of light, say at a gas station or on an on-ramp onto a highway, and you're under 120 lux or whatever, and then you get on onto the main highway, and you're looking down into the dark area, you can't see anything in there by contrast, because the contrast between the area you're in and the new dark area is so vast that it's actually preventing you from being able to penetrate into that area with your eyesight.
Yeah, so there's that, and the other issue is the glare, right? If you're talking about pedestrians rather than drivers, you can have lots of situations where you probably have a lot of illuminance on the vertical plane, right? But you can't see anybody because they're standing in front of a lamp, right? And the lamp is shining into your eyes, and so therefore you can't see them very well. We did a little activity a couple days ago when I was at a meeting at a conference. We were up on the rooftop of a building in Hamburg, right? So this area has no lights, right? You can walk around really well up there. You can see everybody's faces really well, right? And so the amount of ambient light that's necessary to recognize faces, for example, is actually really quite low, much lower than people generally think. The problem is, if you have lamps that have a lot of glare, then you're going to have difficulty recognizing faces, especially if you have a relatively large distance between the lamps.
You know, if I was going to do a song intro to this podcast, it would be the "I Wear My Sunglasses at Night." I mean,
I had someone write to me actually about that his town switched to really poorly shielded LEDs, and he said, I can't remember if he said that he actually does wear his sunglasses at night, or whether he was just thinking about it because it just bothered him so much when he was driving, which surely would not help with the seeing things.
So you know what bothers me, and I don't know if this is kind of bothering you, Greg, but I feel like we're kind of the perpetrators here, buddy.
I think, we're almost forced to be. We're competing on projects, and to communicate that benefit to people and the extra costs sometimes associated with it can eventually lose you a sale.
Yeah, I mean,
that's the hard part.
Well, this is why one of the ideas that I have, right, is that we need to spend more money on lighting design and less money on lights, right?
Yeah.
And in particular on the energy for lights, right? And so that's why I would hope that this idea of having a higher electricity tax for lighting would then give the incentive to spend more on the design. You see a similar issue with controls, right? Or motion sensors, right? Which in some places, not everywhere, but in some specific situations, motion sensors with controls could be a good solution. The problem is that you don't save money doing that, right? So there are places that do it. For example, in Reykjavik, they get all of their electricity is geothermal, right? They're not producing any carbon, but they care a lot about light pollution in Reykjavik. And so when they put up a bike path, they've got these bike paths that have motion sensors to turn on and ramp off when someone comes onto the path. So people can choose if they want to use these solutions that will reduce light pollution and reduce the energy consumption. But right now it's not economical in very many situations, right? And so if it was made to be more economical, then more people would do it.
Well, here's the
Another
issue
example
too.
I just heard. Yeah,
I was going to say
go
with
ahead.
lighting controls, just to add to that, a disaster would be like poorly installed light fixtures on lighting controls. So now you're walking into a path and some 80-watt light fixture comes blasting into your face. I mean,
Yeah,
you got to get the design right on that and the fixture install
that's
right in
right.
order for those controls to really work well.
And the control has to work
Exactly. And
well.
I think that
Yeah.
the control, it's really going to have to be based also on a ramp and not like a turn on, turn off like we used to have with security lighting, right? Because if you imagine that you're living on a residential street at the very edge of town, right? That's the kind of place that it would make a lot of sense. You could probably turn the lights off at nighttime after midnight, as long as you have.
Uh-oh. Scott, we lost Dr. Kyba. Hi, yeah, we got
Can you
you.
hear me?
There.
Yeah.
All right, I got a message that the host is disconnected.
Oh,
So
okay.
Oh.
Yeah,
Don't know what that's
these
about.
are internet podcasts. So hey, listeners, chill out. This is Get a Grip on Lighting. It's not the BBC. It's not CNN. We're not as sophisticated. I do have everything here on battery backup though. So if there was a power outage, we'd still be live. So we do have some stuff like that. But hey, I think to address this, Dr. Kyba, is there any final thoughts you'd like to tell us about a conference that's coming up or something like that?
Yeah, so one place that we would really love to see a lot more participation from people working in lighting is the Artificial Light at Night conference, which is taking place in Utah next year in November. And this conference is now in its 5th edition. It brings together people from very many disciplines, ranging from physics, measuring light in the atmosphere, ecologists and biologists, but also even people that are historians or people working in literature, light historically in novels. And we try to bring in people from government. We also have usually some speakers from industry. And this is one area where we'd really, really love to see more participation from lighting industry, people being involved, coming to share their perspective, for example, about how we can move forward with better lighting and which techniques don't work, for example, that might, for someone who doesn't come from the industry, at first sound like a good idea. And also to listen and hear what's going on in medical studies and in ecological studies about how light can affect things. So we'd really love to see more participation. The conference is called Artificial Light at Night, Allen 2018. And yeah, hope to see a lot of people there.
I think there's going to be a huge, there's going to be, this is the official podcast of the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors. Visit NAILD.org, all you listeners out there. But I think we could talk the president of that association. We know him pretty well, Greg Corey.
Yeah.
We could probably talk him into sending an ambassador to that conference for sure. And then, I don't know, Dr. Kyba, do you think the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast would be welcome at that conference?
Yeah, absolutely. You can do a lot of interviews with a lot of different people. It's a good chance to catch up with a lot of researchers. You can maybe film 3 or 4 podcasts while you're there.
Maybe do a roundtable discussion or something like that with a couple different people from different angles. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, it's totally great idea.
Do you have any books that you want to advertise on the podcast, or any other websites other than the Artificial Light at Night?
To some extent, I would just say the International Dark Sky Association, right? Check it out. There are quite a few people in lighting who are involved there because it's an issue of concern for them. So, I've had some people that have sort of wondered, you must have really bad relations with the lighting industry, right? And I say to them, look, my perspective is that we should basically rip out every lamp that's there and put in a new one, right? So that's very clearly not an industry negative position.
Exactly. We're going to do it all over again. Greg, we're starting over. We're starting over.
Exactly. No, but this is really the position of a lot of dark sky advocates. You have a couple people who are really on the all lights out warpath, but it's a really minor component of the community, right? Yeah, so it's not an aggressive negative thing. I think everybody's trying to be pragmatic and come up with solutions that allow for good visibility inside of cities, even allow for artistic lighting and things like that, and yet we generally move forward with light that's better for the environment. Actually, one last point I wanted to bring up, because I was talking to a journalist from Toronto she was talking about similar to what you said about all these buildings now being lit up. One idea I've had is that the reason Christmas lighting is so special is because it's only there for a couple weeks every year.
It's intermittent,
right?
yeah.
Exactly. And when lighting is there all the time, it becomes boring. So you could imagine a city dealing with this issue by saying, okay, you know what we're going to do? We're going to tell everybody you can install facade lighting. That's fine. You can install architectural lighting. But everybody should leave it off except on Friday and Saturday nights, right? When we really want to get like a lot of downtown economy going, right? Maybe during the time that the birds are going through, we leave it off for those ones. But otherwise, it's going to be like a Friday and Saturday night thing. That's like the light night in the city. And the other 5 days a week, we just leave it off, right? That would make those days more special. So people would really actually go there to appreciate the light. And it's not like then a ban, right? Because this is not what people are, no one's going to be happy with like a ban on architectural lighting, right? So this is the kind of idea to try and come up with like community-based ways of addressing this, being able to have the light when we want to have light, being able to have darkness at a lot of other times when the light's not really so necessary. So it's an idea just to throw out there.
All right. Yep. Well, Greg, it looks like we're going to Utah there, buddy.
There you go.
Hey, well, thank you for coming on the
Excellent.
show, Dr. Kyba.
It was my pleasure. It was great to talk to you.